Well, this morning we heard some wonderful presentations to identify what the problem is, particularly in relation to retention and recruitment. And this afternoon we're going to discuss what we're doing about it. And our first speaker is this afternoon is Rebecca Shrimpton from the Australian Country Director of the Asia Group. Her full CV is attached in your papers, but she's a recognised expert on terrorism, insurgency, cyber, space policy, missile defence, nuclear and strategic deterrence, and advanced dual-use technologies within national security. She brings over 25 years of government experience, including senior positions at the Department of Defence, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and the Australian Trade and Investment Commission. Now, fortunately, Rebecca has been listening to the presentations this morning, so she's across everything that's been discussed to date. So we'll now ask Rebecca Shrimpton to speak to us this afternoon in relation to what are we doing about the issues of retention and recruitment. Thank you.
Well, hello everybody. I am really sorry that I couldn't join you in person today. These interactions and these engagements are always so much better when you can be there in person, and I very much looked forward to some of the conversations that this would spark. But thank you for inviting me to contribute, to be a part of this conversation. It's one that means a lot to me. It's one I've given quite a lot of thought to over time. And I think that, first of all, I should say congratulations to the organisers, because I think the flow and the setup and the way that this conversation has unfolded today is excellent. It makes sense. It's provided beautiful context. Listening to General Lay this morning, I was really struck by something that I'm going to draw out as a similar background theme, or at least a driver of my approach as I talk to you about this concept of recruiting from the Pacific specifically, why we would do that and perhaps some of the considerations in it. But one of the things that struck me as I was at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute for a while, and that is where the article that I will be talking to today was published. I worked very luckily with a passionate young ADF member who is now back in service, and so we'll have to be a little bit careful for him. But his research, his insights, and his contribution, I would like to acknowledge, and that was Major Zach Lambert. I also had other assistants from other officials and Pacific Islanders who were both happy to and in various degrees preferred not to be identified for their role and their contribution to our study and what we came up with. Because that article was the reason I think I was invited to speak to you here today, I'm going to kind of at a very high level just step you through what we did in that. That can be found very easily online, either at the ASPI website, or if you just search Regional Security and Pacific Partnerships along with my name, you can find that piece. And if you find anything that I say remotely interesting today, I encourage you to follow up and read the detail, because I won't be able to do that or get into that in the time that we have allotted. Should just importantly say I am now the country lead or country executive for the Asia Group, which is a US-based geopolitical risk and corporate consultancy. So we do a very heavy national security focus, and most of my portfolio of work is in the national security sector still, but I have moved into private sector. So it's a slightly different take, but I'm finding myself grappling with all the same issues. So some of those previous conversations that said that this is not an issue that either militaries are facing in isolation, that Australia is facing in isolation, or that is a unique phenomenon to military recruiting. This is a challenge across the board, across our economies, at a global level, at a regional level, and at a national level. So we do really need to start thinking in different and creative ways about this. And now, in short, what I wanted to talk to you about with the piece was we had a look at, as the debate has sort of ebbed and flowed, around this idea of Pacific recruitment into the ADF. It seemed to gather a bit of steam, certainly from the 2023 Defence Strategic Review, which again really shone a light on the challenges that the ADF is having with recruitment and retention. Once again, that is not a unique problem set to have, but it is a uniquely important one for our nation to solve and for the ADF to solve. And for all the reasons that General Lay said, we are not in a good situation strategically. The environment is deteriorating far more rapidly, I think, than any of us, even those who have probably been on the alert for a while, far more quickly than we had anticipated, and in far more complex and interdependent ways. So look, the urgency in this conversation and the need to move beyond rhetoric and admiring problems is real, and I hope that I bring that sense to this topic. So we did have a look at this because it can be quite simple and an instinctive sort of reflex reaction almost to say, oh look, we have a recruitment problem. It's a lack of people in the country, or it's a lack of talent. Where else can we look? Oh look, there's some neighbourhood countries around who have some great skills, some great capabilities, and let's just think about that as a numbers game. Let's try and bring in and complement the ADF with numbers. What we looked at here is the various pathways that you might actually pursue Pacific recruitment, some of the issues and challenges which are very thorny, highly political, and actually very imbued with legal and constitutional and other issues once you start sort of scraping the surface. But I think the key question, important for me to qualify as well, I am not a workforce expert, I am not a personnel expert. I come from a strategy and a policy background. So my approach necessarily and always starts with the why. You know, why are we doing this? So there are two kind of arguments, or two aspects to the argument here. One is numbers, as we've talked about, and the other is what I would call numbers plus. So it's yes, we'll get a few, but ultimately we should think about this more strategically and perhaps bring in elements of capability assessment, thinking about our own objectives in the region and how we understand, work in the kind of operations that we need to deploy on, the kinds of military tasks that we need our ADF to be able to do. Can this actually genuinely provide a capability outcome for the ADF? And this is the more interesting question from my perspective. I'll give you a bit of a spoiler alert, but frankly, if anyone in our system, in the Australian system, is looking to Pacific recruitment for numbers, that's a mug's game. We're not going to find the numbers. And if we are pursuing a strategy of Pacific recruitment into the ADF to boost numbers, we will do it the wrong way, and we will probably create far more of a problem for ourselves than the one that we currently have. That's really fundamental and important, but that is the perspective of strategy, right? So why are we doing this? And in this paper, when we spoke to people in the ADF themselves, to people who had great experience within the Pacific, across the Pacific on operations, when we spoke to Pacific Islanders, most importantly to Pacific Islanders themselves, there was a huge variety of experience and a huge variety of opinion. What strikes you about any work in the Pacific is it's a huge mistake, but one that's easy to make because of the size of the nations and the populations involved. That the Pacific is the Pacific, but there is such difference, diversity, culturally, language-wise, in the way communities operate, whether they are matriarchal or patriarchal. You know how much tribal elements matter, how much they don't. Every single Pacific Island country is infused with its own very special and very unique culture, history, politics, you name it. And that alone makes this a really interesting but a very complex question to engage with. There is no Pacific. It is a geographic region, but it is a very complex one, and it is a very vexing one for policymakers for all of the reasons that I've just said. Look, we can divide up this challenge if we say we think we want to do this, and I think for two reasons, the two that we've said, yes, we may get something of a numbers outcome from considering this, but for me, the better and the stronger, the more strategic, the more deliberate, and the more, or the superior way of thinking about this is, why would we do this for reasons of strategy, policy, operations, etc., capability, not just ADF numbers. And then we thought about how, a couple of different pathways for how you might actually pursue this, and then how they would deliver both against, that numbers criteria, but again, that more strategic criteria of more integrated working, of the sum being more than its parts, of having a genuine regional approach, of partnerships, of realising many of our defence and national strategic objectives through this engagement and this activity. And from that, really, a couple of the key findings were, define the problem clearly, and understand what it is that you are trying to achieve from the exercise itself. If we take now that we're not just doing this for numbers, that we are doing this for strategic reasons, I think that's the right way to think about it, because often the numbers outcome will be a secondary effect of getting the strategy right. And I think that's true of defence and strategy writ large, that the broader recruitment and ADF retention challenge, I think I very much agree with General Lay that this is a strategy problem. We have a real lack of strategic thinking and strategic depth in this country. If you get the strategic foundations of what you are doing and why correct, a lot of things flow very differently from that. So there is a need very much for a centre out or a top down to marrying up with a bottom up and external to internal kind of view. Issues that you have. That you immediately and very quickly run into. I've said some of them already. It's the cultural and the political sensitivities, historical baggage of the way that we and others in the West have at times behaved within the region. Obviously not just us and things that we need to get past, but sensitivities that we need to recognise. But the other thing is again, these nations are small. They have their own needs. They have sovereign interests. They are their own people. So in Australia pursuing a strategy of Pacific recruitment that has the strategic objective of being a broad capability enhancer, of really making partnerships more meaningful, more impactful, more operationally effective. If we go about it in all of these ways, then one of the first things that you have to do, obviously, is engage with your Pacific partners and really get their perspective and put yourself in their shoes. One of the first issues that comes up when you do that is obviously that they do not want to lose talent from their own countries. We might look around and see the potential for tens to possibly even hundreds, who knows, if we're wildly successful, maybe thousands. These are very, very big numbers for the Pacific to cope with losing. And we are looking at a talent pool of, healthy, young, smart, committed, motivated, good character, people who are mission driven. We have a lot of trouble finding that within our own system. We shouldn't make the mistake of thinking that that's going to be a lot easier elsewhere and in the Pacific, and we should not make the mistake of thinking that money is going to make all the difference. Money is not all that matters to either young Australians these days, and it is certainly not the only thing that matters to our Pacific Island friends as much as it is valuable. No one would doubt that it is valuable. The other thing, of course, about this is this issue of sovereignty. Now, again, we seem to understand this so intrinsically and inherently when we talk about things like AUKUS, where we're worried for ourselves. Well, let's now put the idea of hundreds of Pacific Islanders coming into the ADF, either integrated into the broader ADF in a broad sense, or with a focus on specific categories, that perhaps enhance the capabilities that are necessary from a Pacific Island perspective, that from a sovereign interest perspective, those nations themselves would find useful to cultivate. You can think about timeframes. Do we have a limit here? So that it's not a one-way stream of humans and potential, but that there's an idea of actually creating something of a circular economy between our nation and others of the Pacific, where talent is nurtured and utilised and executed, in a longer term cycle, thinking about a bit of back and forth in that sort of process. But the one thing we cannot afford to do is to strip the Pacific itself of its capabilities. For Australia to try and solve one problem, ADF numbers, by creating another, is a real mistake, and it's one we're at risk of making. And again, I'm going to keep harking back to this. Again, it's because we are lacking a strategic framework for much of what we are thinking about and doing, and we are lacking the clarity and the definition of what we do care about, what we don't, what is in and what is out, when it comes to our national security, what we can do and what we must do. There are some really, really important gains, and I'd like to talk to them again. I really want to get past the numbers issue with you quickly. I myself deployed a very long time ago now, and it really does feel like a very long time ago, but on Operation Bellisi to Bougainville as a civilian peace monitor. That operation, if you're not familiar with it, and it has receded into distant memory for many, although it's resurfacing, was a mission of 4 nations. It was brokered actually initially by New Zealand at the political level, but as a military or a civil military operation, it was Australia, New Zealand, Fiji and Vanuatu as equal partners. I was lucky enough to be one of few Australians. I think there was only one Australian ADF member in my patrol team. I was up in Bulka in the capital. I had a Fijian commanding officer. I had a New Zealand Maori OPSO operations officer. I had another Kiwi in the team. We had a lot of Nivans, and we had a lot of Fijians. And that experience for me, all the way back in 2000, 2001, that was career defining and trajectory changing. I absolutely loved it. And let me tell you why. When you're in the Pacific and you're trying to connect with the community, you're trying to make a meaningful difference on the ground, you're trying to communicate, engage, and achieve a certain number of objectives. Whenever you're working in someone else's country and with them, you've always got to be thinking about how everything that you do affects them. And what I loved and what I learnt was that the Fijian CO that I had a completely different sense of time to anything I'd ever come across before. Anything I'd experienced in my training in Bamako with the Australian military, completely different set of time. Bougainvilleans themselves, none of them had watches. They would judge what time of the day it was by when the sun came up, where it was in the sky, and when it was going down. Life does not run by minutes, and it doesn't even run by hours. We would go and sit in a village where we were sort of supposed to be and we'd planned to be, and the villagers were expecting us, and we would rock up at 10 o'clock and there'd be absolutely nobody there. And culturally, and in fact in a lot of operational discipline, they'd say, right, you're going to give that 10 to 15 minutes and then you're moving on. We would sometimes wait 2 to 3 hours, and we would sit down in the sun and we would start doing things like making balloon animals, or just talking amongst ourselves, and gradually people would start to come out of the jungle, out of houses, out of you name it. They were curious. They realised you were there, or they were just turning up. They were just turning up on their own time. And then we would open very respectfully. We would try every time we went into the village to see if either the village elder or a church leader would actually prefer to do the speaking on our behalf and share the information with their own people themselves, or whether that was something we worked towards. And often they weren't comfortable the first time, but they really relished being put back in that leadership position and being given that authority again, which is very culturally aligned for them to be able to you know, assert their own authority and their own power structures. But what this taught me was that we all have very different ways of doing things. We all have different sort of reactions, but that culture matters, that understanding the culture of everyone that you're working with. So the 4 nations together had to get past very different military cultures and very different social cultures. But then we were also going into somewhere that was culturally very different to where any of us came from. And that takes time to learn and to understand. And I think personally, if we were to get Pacific recruitment right, I think it could be an ultimate or an optimal capability enhancer. It could teach us things about our operating environment, about indicators and warnings, about how to read, you know, tips and cues, how to most effectively engage. It could teach us an awful lot about how to operate in what is fundamentally or certainly one of our primary operating environments, and one where we have unique and special responsibilities as Australia and as the ADF. Pacific recruits, as well. I think, again, taking that holistic and that more strategic view, if we were to successfully integrate, and again, this comes with a raft of challenges, but if we were to successfully integrate Pacific Island nations, people across a variety of ADF categories, of operational categories, that sort of suit their longer term needs as well as ours, we can genuinely achieve, a broad-based capability uplift. We can achieve numerically what I do not think is significant enough to justify this policy on its own, but you can achieve a numerical outcome. From a retention and a recruitment perspective, I know a lot of people, and this came out very much in the interviewing, and it does come out in the literature. The personal experience of deploying to, working with, operating with your neighbours and the Pacific Islands, it is genuinely a life and a perception changing experience. Anyone who's deployed anywhere will tell you that. I think that's not something that's very special to me or the Pacific, but it is a good reason, given how absolutely strategically vital the Pacific is to this nation, that we are able not only to most effectively interact with, engage with, respect, optimise our partnerships and our relationships, but that we are able to leverage them for not only strategic but operational and even tactical reasons. You can pull the thread on this far enough that you say, real success might actually look like the ADF no longer really having to deploy much for either humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, stabilisation, or other kinds of missions, because in 10 to 20 years, this through this process, a follow-on or an outcome is that we have much more partners in place, much more, much stronger, more resilient structures and systems, disaster management, security management in place, or that we just have options to draw from when we do need to respond to regional contingencies, be they in the Pacific or elsewhere, where we do have this, this experience and a comfort and a sort of a looking for the word of a literacy, if you like, with our Pacific Island nation partners. So that's the way we ended up looking at this as a result of the study, as a result of talking to people. There's no panacea for the ADF's numbers, recruitment and retention issue. This is going to be a really, really complex problem to get after. It needs us to think about, I'm really struck again by some of the previous presenters here, to think about the way we talk about in our country the military as distinct from civilians. And this, to me, I think is going in a worrying direction as well. We through civil military separation, through our approach to civil military relations, quite deliberately have a separation between our military and our civilian actors and the way they operate and the way decisions are made. But I think we have fallen into the trap of making, the military so distinct from everyday civilians and the rest of our society that it is genuinely now considered different. We have created a gap between our servicemen and women who are us, who are fighting for us, who are putting often their lives and their families on the line for us. And we've kind of created an other. And this is something I really want to think about a bit more, because this is something that as you go into the Pacific and you start dealing with nations who either have no military at all, police forces, or they use their own civilians and their community for security purposes. This is a real opportunity as well for us to think about our own narrative about who our service people are, what they're doing, and why they are doing it. I think it's an opportunity to kind of reframe the narrative in just one aspect. We need to do that across the board at the most sort of fundamental strategic level. But in the same way that I think we really should think seriously about recruiting Pacific Islanders into the ADF, but we need to do so in a way that is culturally sensitive, politically sensitive, and in a way that has genuine mutual interest at heart. The same is true for the broader problem set for the ADF, and I think for the military as it is currently situated in our society. It is currently too easy, I agree again with General Lay, for our politicians to blame the military when things go wrong, and the defence organisation when things go wrong, to not accept the risk of decisions, or to accept it in rhetoric and then in practice. Actually, it's the department that sort of tends to, or the military services that tend to sort of take the brunt of explanations and narratives. We hold up our servicemen and women and we revere them on days like Anzac Day, Remembrance Day. These are days where I am so proud, and I am so overwhelmed by what people have done for me to have the life that I have today. But the schizophrenia between the growing turnout of young people to these parades, and then their reaction to what the military is doing now, what the military is asking of people now, of things like nuclear discussions about nuclear submarines, etc. About now, there's a real cognitive dissonance, and I do think that there's political leadership that needs to be asserted. There's a public interest. Clearly it's there, but I think we really need to engage this public interest more. We need to understand our military as part of our society, as an important extension of Australia, not as something acting on our behalf and doing things we don't want it to be doing. And then as you extend this thinking and this thought process to the Pacific, it's the same thing. I think we have a lot to learn. I think it really increases the way that we're able to talk about the task in front of our militaries, the way we talk about defence. I think it's possible to put a really, really positive spin, not just spin, but to really achieve positive outcomes from this kind of activity. And I think that, again, done the right way for the right reasons, there's real potential here. But it is not a silver bullet, and it will not, in and of itself, resolve recruitment and retention problems for the ADF. Thank you. I think I've got 2 minutes or so before I'm due to stop speaking, but I always prefer an engagement. So if there is a question, I'd love to take it.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. I'm going to say a few words at the end, but we've got a few minutes for questions. So if you've got a question, would you please stand up and face John Howells up the back corner so that he can record it, so that Rebecca can see you who's raising the question.
Sorry, Rebecca, David Harvey. Given that Australian agriculture is basically taking everybody out of the Pacific they can find under the PALM scheme, and of course I think I'm aware that the UK is still recruiting on and off for their military Who in the Australian bureaucracy should really take and own a strategy, presuming that given that defence is definitely not the only players in this market?
So it's a really good point, and it's a specific example actually that we picked up in the paper. I'm trying to find quickly it now, but there were a the Palm program was raised as a specific problem, as something that some Pacific leaders do not like, because it's basically a labour mobility scheme for Australia's ends, and many in the Pacific don't quite see the value that they get from that. They're experiencing the brain drain, and they're not getting a lot of gain. So within our system, who should take responsibility? Well, luckily you've got General Fox coming up next, and she has both the absolutely vital but probably unenviable job of really starting to get at some of these issues at that whole of defence, or sort of whole of military from that perspective, from a joint force perspective. Of course, I'm very interested to hear what General Fox has to say, and of course there's that role, but we need to be bringing in other parts of defence as well: international policy division, strategic policy division, those that are taking that really long perspective, or even just managing the day-to-day relationship between us and some of these countries. They've got good insights, they've got good relationships, they need to have input to this process. Yes, a whole of government and a whole of nation perspective, as with, I think, any other element of our security these days, is important. We always have this problem of robbing Peter to pay Paul, or one department, which again we try and take a specific, a sectoral, a defence perspective to a problem. In this case, we're running into perceptions and baggage of a program that we didn't own, but that looks and smells very much like a different program that we may not be as familiar with as you have to be in defence, that has created antibodies to the very approach that we might take. So coordinating, or at least deconflicting between government departments and having a nice coherence to a national policy approach is very useful. That will also open up doors, because it will reveal parts of the security challenge in different, possibly even in different organisations where this could have value, or where we can bring skills from different organisations into the ADF, whether on a transitory or a permanent basis, as we need to. So, taking that approach opens up a whole lot, and then bringing in the private sector, once again, that's an extra complication and an extra layer. But it can, the private sector can increasingly start to play an important role as we think about recruitment, retention, as we think about mobility of skills and talent, as we think about patterns of people's careers. We really do need to think beyond government as well. So that's a point very, very well made. Thank you.
One last question, please.
Yeah, g'day, Beck. I'm from Victoria Police, so I'm somewhat of an outsider here, but we're recruiting now as well, so if anybody's interested, talk to me afterwards. I was actually fascinated with what you were just saying about the othering of the military, and the fact, so policing in the Westminster system is very much based on the Peelian principles, and one of them is that the public are the police and the police are the public. It's just that the police are the only ones who are employed full-time to do that function, and I think that's a really key point. If you can get that narrative across that, the defence forces are the public and the public are the defence forces, then you're going to go a long way to sort of creating that social cohesion that you're talking about. The other comment I was going to make, you've kind of answered, and it was just very much about that lean into how do you achieve two things at the same time. So, do you need as many people in the military, for example, if you've got a cohesive buffer in the Pacific, or do you need as many people who can do occupational work if you've got really strong relationships with policing, that's our core bread and butter at different times. Obviously we're not going to go in the first instance, but maybe it's leaning into people down the track. So I just thought the point you made then was, so now I'm probably more making a comment that the point you made in the last answer was the answer that I was looking for. So thank you.
Thank you for your example, and thank you. I'm a Victorian. I'm down in Melbourne right now, freezing. Thanks for the work you do. I also studied police studies, so I think it's probably I might see that a little bit more than others because I come a little bit from an academic background there too. But you nailed it. The secret sauce is optimizing outcomes. So if you're keeping an outcome in mind and not the process, not following a bouncing ball, if you remain open as you go on the particular journey, both to technological developments and potential solutions, to completely out of the box ideas that may actually have relevance. If you if you keep sort of your eyes up, so to speak, and keep looking out, keep asking questions, keep engaging, beyond your normal set of stakeholders, I think that's the secret sauce to optimizing anything that you do. And I think the efficiencies and that the outcome that you want to achieve does flow from that. It very much does. So again, thank you for your question / comment, and thank you all for having me.
Thank you very much, Rebecca.